We were at this retreat center for a few days with our group when we were in Australia, we'd go on these retreats with all of our groups that would come many times a year. And that retreat time was nice. We'd usually go to a camp, some sort of conference center, different location, and have kind of these one-on-ones, a lot of relational time, some sessions. And we also did some activities for fun. And this one particular place, we did these like pedal bike things. And then one of those activities was called Goliath. And here's Goliath. And the way Goliath works is you're hooked up into this gear, right? There's like a harness, a helmet, you're double clipped into these ropes. And on the other end of the ropes, this team is like your friends, are part of this team, and they're holding on the other end of the rope, and they walk you back, and you start rising as they walk. So when it's my turn, I'm clipped in. And then, you're starting to rise up these towers in the middle between these towers here, going like 60 feet in the air, right? And I'm nearing the top of this rise, slowly rising, enjoying this beautiful view, right? You see the canopies of the treetops that are going down the hill there. You see the ocean in the distance, and it's a great view, but in a way, it's a trick. It's an illusion, right? It actually isn't. It's very much there. It's very much real. But the illusion part of it is it doesn't last, right? So at the very top, enjoying this peaceful scene, and it's all of a sudden disrupted by this countdown that everyone starts yelling. And at the end of this countdown, I am to pull this safety cord, and that starts this plummeting drop 60 feet back down. Attached to ropes, of course, but it's like total free fall. And here's the thing. I know that when I know what happens next, right? You pull the cord and you know what's coming. You know you're supposed to fall. But the first thing that comes out of my mouth when I do that is no. It's just overwhelming instant regret at what I just did. And when I get to the bottom, the person who works at the camp, the staff person, is like, we hear a lot of things when people pull that cord. Never have we heard anyone say, no. And which got me thinking, where did that come from, right? For something I did voluntarily, something that I was fully aware of what comes next, it was actually a weird response. And maybe I wasn't fully prepared, right? Mentally, I knew what would happen when I pulled that cord, but the experience hit different. And we're strange creatures when it comes to what we experience and how we calculate risk, right? What risk is involved. And there's an assumption, I think, that we as people often calculate risk. And we do, right? That's true in some things, some professions, like those involved in insurance, those involved in risk assessment, right? Actuaries, right? Their job is to calculate risk. They come up with these algorithms, these formulas to calculate risk. But often in our everyday lives, we actually don't really behave that way. We actually don't behave too analytically. It's far easier for us as people to rely on our feelings. Right? For better or worse. It's too much mental energy to do all that calculation. It's far easier to ask the question, do I trust this? Does this feel right? Right? And so for that swing, that Goliath swing, do I trust this? Do I trust that system? Do I trust this design? Do I trust the people, the gear? Right? All those things I'm doing really quickly. But feelings are tricky because they open us to new possibilities, or they can close us off from growth. And in our gospel story today with the disciples, it's kind of like this giant swing experience for them. They've been walking around with Jesus, getting to have this great view of what the world could be, right? Jesus is healing. He's doing these miracles. He's dispensing wisdom out left and right. And people are really finding meaning. They're finding hope. And for the disciples, they're just part of his crew. So they're riding high, right? They're just enjoying this, feeling pretty good about themselves, feeling pretty good about the world. But then for the second time, he tells them about where this road leads, right? He tells them, the Son of Man is to be betrayed into human hands, and they will kill him. 3 days after being killed, he will rise again. So for the disciples, it's kind of this signal. It's this time in their experience with Jesus, it's time to pull that safety cord. There's this interesting kind of response from the disciples at this point, given that they were devoting their lives to following Jesus around. So they were trying to learn from him as best they could. But here's what they do next. Again, the strange response. But they did not understand what he was saying and were afraid to ask him. And I was struck when I read that this past week, that phrase, but they were afraid to ask. Why were they afraid to ask? Because they really knew the answer and they didn't want to face it? Because they were already disappointed? Or maybe they were just content with their view at the top and they didn't really want that to end. One thing's for sure is they knew what happens when the first time Jesus told them this. Peter had said, no, Jesus, that's not going to happen. Trust us. And Jesus gave Peter the whole, get behind me, Satan, right? Your ways are not my ways type of talk. Well, what happens next, instead of being curious, instead of asking Jesus, hey, what does that mean for us? What are you asking for us? They get caught up in this argument about their own importance, right? But they were silent. For the second time, they failed to pursue this opportunity of asking questions, to engage in difficult conversation. When Jesus asked, hey, what were you arguing about along the way? I knew you were arguing about something. What was it? It could have been a difficult conversation as they confront, as they fess up to what they were arguing about, but no. They want to hide it from him, so they are silent. And see, there's a lot to be gained from finding the right questions to ask, being willing to engage in holy, but yes, very difficult conversations. As I mentioned before, I spent years working with young adults in their 20s, many of whom were at the point in their faith where they were ready to pull that safety cord, that safety release, and embrace these new questions that were being asked of them, that they were encouraged to ask. And a lot of them came away from that whole volunteer experience wishing that their faith communities back home would do the same, would have courage to ask similar questions, difficult yet holy ones. And they were often frustrated when they admitted that, you know what, my congregation back home is really preoccupied with their own importance. Margaret Wheatley has a quote here that I love. Be brave enough to start a conversation that matters. Questions and conversations that matter, that get beyond kind of the surface level stuff, but ones that get to growing in relationship, being challenged and being encouraged. And I've wondered collectively, as conversations, what are the questions that matter? Right? The ones that get to the heart of our purpose for being here, our hopes for the future. Not just grieving the past, but ones that challenge our inaction or our action. Ones that confront how we see power. And, just recently we've learned from our siblings in Springfield, Ohio, the questions that matter to them as far as the immigrant communities among them, right? That are facing this violence, a new wave of violence and threats because of just lies made up about them, right? So they're asking, what are the questions that we need to ask ourselves? How do we confront how we see power? Because that's where the gospel, that's where Jesus' work among us gets to work, right? I think of difficult questions, but ones that are important to ask. The Brazilian bishop, Elder Camara. When I give food to the poor, they call me a saint. But when I ask why the poor have no food, they call me a communist. See, once we know the kind of power that Jesus is about, we learn some of the questions that are worth asking are not necessarily safe ones. They're ones that involve risk. Risk for us, risk for our comfort, risk for the status quo. But they're questions that ask us if we're going to pull the cord or just be content with the view from where we are. And yes, there's risk. But in this risk, it is also a journey. And it might not be like the one that we are expecting or the journey that we were expecting. But it is the journey that always leads us where Jesus is willing to go. Thanks be to God.